Good afternoon and or late evening, depending on which side of the world you're on. I'm Brock Jennings.
And I'm Peter Clark.
Today is I forgot the date. God.
Really? It's the 1st of December.
No, I wanted you to cut it so we could do it again, but okay, fine. I
can cut it so
this.
you can do it again. You can do it again.
No, just leave it.
Okay.
And this is your friendly neighborhood theology podcast, Stumbling Block. And listeners, we are giving you just a little preview right now of what it's like if you subscribe to Patreon. And we'll give you all the best of our bloopers. You get one blooper for free back there. Believe me, we make them, don't we, Peter?
Oh, yeah, we do.
He just cuts them all out. Except that one.
Most of them out.
Yeah, most of them. You left one a couple weeks ago. I let you get away with it, but I shook my fist at you from 4,000 miles away.
Well, that's fine.
I can tell you're thoroughly intimidated by my fist shaking.
Oh, absolutely. I was always thoroughly intimidated by it from 4 feet away, too.
Intimidated?
Intimidated.
Did I ever shake my fist at you from 4 feet away?
Probably.
Yeah, probably. Well, so it's just after Thanksgiving for Americans, and obviously I am an American, but I'm not there right now, so there is no Thanksgiving on my end of the universe.
Probably a harvest festival or something.
Yeah, it's called Oktoberfest.
That's right.
I didn't go, actually. Believe it or not, I've now been in Tübingen, what is it, 8 months or something? 8, 9 months, something like that.
Is that all?
And yeah, why? You thought it was longer?
I thought you were pushing a year.
I am pushing a year. It'll be a year in April.
Okay.
But I haven't really left Tübingen. I went up to Hamburg just for one day. And by one day, I meant a series of hours that I was in Hamburg, and then I came back.
Did you have a hamburger while you were in Hamburg?
No. I didn't. I did eat Kentucky Fried Chicken, though, and that was just a little weird, eating Kentucky Fried Chicken at the train station in Germany. But, I was there for a specific purpose, and then I came home. And I went to a neighboring village nearby. Mm-hmm. Then I came back the same day. I got back at 2 a.m. I left at, get this, Peter, I left at 5 a.m, and I got back at 2 a.m. the next day.
Jeez.
Delayed trains. And then I went to a nearby village. I can't remember the name of it, for Easter Sunday. Missed the church service. And but otherwise I haven't left Tübingen. I'm just very content here.
Well, that's nice.
I do want to go down to Switzerland. We're about 2 hours away from Switzerland, maybe even less. I don't know. But where I want to go is a little village that I have been to as a kid, and I want to go back as an adult.
Oh, fun. Just
for a day or two. But, to get me out of Tübingen is kind of hard, actually.
Yeah.
There's this thing called travel, and I'm just like, why? Everybody's like, oh, but you could go see this and this and this. I'm like, I'm here to write a doctoral dissertation.
You can do both, though. I mean, Kate traveled quite a bit when she was in Europe in her undergrad. She spent a semester in England and traveled all over Europe.
Well, I wanted to meet Sarah Coakley at St. Andrews in Scotland, but she unfortunately was moving to the U.S., so she wrote me and said she couldn't meet me. I was very sad. I was going to fly to St. Andrews.
Oh, that'd have been fun.
To meet with her, but yeah, I'll probably go to Switzerland or for a day, but I don't know. Maybe sightseeing doesn't appeal to me.
Maybe not. It definitely appeals to me. I'm definitely a sightseer. I love doing that kind of stuff.
Well, when you come visit me, I can do it with you then. We can go together.
There we go.
So, and your Thanksgiving was okay?
Yeah, my
That
Thanksgiving...
strange American holiday.
My Thanksgiving was fine.
Yes, well, I remember 2 years ago we spent it together. We recorded an episode.
We did. I remember that. That was a fun time.
Oh, do you remember when we started that, though? It was so strange to actually sit by each other and record because we've been recording for a distance for so long.
Right? Oh, my
gosh. The
gosh.
first 5 minutes were really weird.
We got back into it, though.
It didn't take long, no, but those first few minutes were a little awkward. By the way, you still have my Luther Seminary sweatshirt from 2 years ago that you're supposed to send me.
I do. We haven't found it yet. We'll send it as soon as we find it.
I bet you left it in Aurora.
Oh, no, surely not. It's probably just in a box somewhere.
Oh, all right. I'll be finished with my doctorate by the time you find it.
Probably.
I liked that sweatshirt, too. I can't believe I left it at your house. It was because we were smoking the cigars and it got smoke on it.
Yeah, or something.
By the way, you'll be proud of me. I've had 2 cigars in the last month.
There you go. Cubans?
I don't know. Romeo Julietas.
Probably then.
But before that, I hadn't had a cigar in a year.
Wow. It's actually been quite a while for me, but that has mostly to do with the weather.
I was going to say, what, has it been a day since you've had a cigar?
No, it's been a couple months, but it's gotten cold here. And
Don't you go somewhere to, like, smoke your pipe or something?
No, and I don't have a good place for that in Madison.
What? Are you, like, dying?
No, this happens to me most years. When I lived in Aurora and had a good place to go to that was sort of reasonably priced while I was in the winter and things like that, that was an exception, an oasis in my time as a pipe and cigar smoker. Generally, I end up giving up pipe and cigar smoking for about 5 months every year.
That sounds horrible given your you.
I don't really have an addictive personality.
Oh, you just do it for the heck of it?
Yeah, I enjoy the flavor.
Uh-huh. And I remember we went to that cigar shop in Minneapolis several times.
Stogie's on Grand, yes.
Yes.
Well, that was that, and then there was also Golden Leaf.
Golden Leaf. That was the one that was my favorite.
Which is run by someone else now. It has a new name. I forget what it is.
Remember you took that picture of me in Golden Leaf, surrounded by all the cigars?
Yeah.
And I said, this is the little slice of heaven. Well, it was.
It is.
May not be the healthiest thing, but it's a little slice of it. What I hate about cigars is this, Peter. I got to tell you this. I had 2 things. The first is I always have to wash my hair afterwards because my hair smells like cigars. But the second thing, I taste it in my mouth for 3 days.
Brush your teeth.
I do. I can brush my teeth. I can use mouthwash. All of that. I still taste the cigar.
Fascinating. I don't have that problem.
Well, aren't you lucky?
I am, apparently. I mean, mostly, I don't have the hair problem because I don't have hair. But...
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I don't think you've had hair as long as I've known you.
No, I really haven't.
So, Peter.
So, Brock.
I think we were going to talk today about your theological rigidity, or lack thereof.
Something like that. Yeah.
And how you may have shifted that or not shifted that. This goes back to our episode on theology and music styles.
Right. I'm going to say, I think the biggest shifts in theology I've had have all come from experience more than from study.
I love it. Tell me more about that.
Well, so I used to have a fairly rigid theology on who could or couldn't take communion and things like that, who should or shouldn't take communion, including that I thought children shouldn't.
Really? Wow.
Really. This was actually into the beginning of seminary that I thought this, until I was assisting with communion at the church that we went to, Humble Walk Lutheran Church, which practices open communion generally, except Kate and I mostly had been sort of signaling that Sam was, not to take both elements.
Oh, really?
Really.
Okay, then. What was your rationale for that?
Tradition, primarily.
tradition, but the Eastern Orthodox commune infants. Luther argues for communing infants in the Large Catechism.
I was still coming into my own as a Lutheran. There's still had a lot of Anglican in me. And there are a lot of Lutherans who won't commune infants.
Yeah, well.
So.
Whatever.
But I thought some kind of education about communion was proper and in order before receiving it. And I still think that some kind of education about communion is proper and in order before, at some point. Anyway, what happened was...
Then there's me, I'd just commune anyone. I'd commune with Cat if I could.
I know, we've been over this.
You want to rehash that?
I really, really don't want to rehash that.
Okay, fine. Sorry. Anyway, keep going.
But so, Sam came up and received the bread from the pastor because he held out his hands, and she'll give bread to anyone who holds out their hands for it. And then he walks over to me with his hands, with the bread in his hands, and just looks up expectantly at me. I'm holding the wine and the grape juice, and I have to make this snap decision: am I going to deny my son communion in front of an entire congregation? I mean, not that it was a huge congregation, it was like 20 people. You know, all of a sudden this is where the rubber hits the road theology, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment I paused for a second, and then I held down the grape juice and said, "The blood of Christ shed for you." And I've been communing whoever asks for it ever since.
What about if an infant reaches out their hand?
For the bread?
Mm-hmm.
I'll give it to him.
Mm-hmm. Does it extend to animals?
No. Animals don't need it because animals are not subject to the fall.
Okay, fine. I just thought I'd see if I could, play in there a little bit.
No.
Hey, dog puts his paws on the communion tray, I'm giving him the bread.
You can do that. I'm not gonna. Yeah. I think
Actually, Lutheran Franciscans at least, might agree with me on that case. Unless you think I'm the only Lutheran who has this weird view.
I don't know. I would bet you're not. There are plenty of weird views held by many weird Lutherans, many of whom I'm friends with.
I just can't believe you guys never talked about it. I mean, we talked about that at PLTS. Can you commune animals or not? You guys never even addressed it?
I don't think it ever came up.
Really? Oh, man. Context really is everything, isn't it?
It really is.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm going to say the other big theological shift I've had in my adult life was on the LGBT issues.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of that was experiential as well.
How was it experiential?
I didn't grow up knowing a lot of LGBT people, especially I didn't know LGBT Christians.
Uh-huh.
Most of the LGBT people I knew growing up were atheists.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't care. But, and I didn't, I thought they had the right to a marriage or a civil union or whatever you wanted to call it. Right? I've always been pro-LGBT rights. But I wasn't sure what their role in the church was for a long time.
And when did that begin to shift for you?
That began to shift for me in college. And then after college as well.
Excuse my slight astonishment, but that shift occurred at Calvin College? I'm impressed.
It began at Calvin College, and it didn't begin because of Calvin College. It began because of shifts that were happening in the Episcopalian Church that I was forced to reckon with. I still disagree with some of the reasoning behind the Episcopalian, the why the Episcopalians shifted towards the ordination of Gene Robinson.
I please fill me in on that. I only know Gene Robinson as a theological thinker. I think he's marvelous.
I'm sure he is. Actually, I haven't read any of his theological works. But
his autobiography is great.
At the time it came across, the way the decision was sort of dispersed to the populace, it came across as a more political decision than a theological one.
Why was it political?
Sort of, it's the right thing to do, and then they found a theological justification for it.
Well, yeah. I can't believe I'm going to say this as a systematic theologian, but not everything has a theological reason.
Right, but who we ordain should.
Well, okay, yeah. I mean, I I agree with you there, but I think the critics of the Lutherans doing this and the Protestants in general doing this, both in America and in Europe, may in fact say that it's faulty theology allowing for this.
Well,
that it's not really theology, that it's all politics.
I think you could make the argument that it's faulty theology for the Lutherans, but then I would get lumped in with that faulty theology.
Yeah.
But my impression with the Lutherans is that it was much more theology first. They took the time to have a conversation amongst the congregations and amongst the people and things like that. There's that whole 10-year Bible study, right?
Well, that's just because they couldn't pass it the first time.
Right, but they still took the time to have a discussion amongst the populace and to educate the congregants and to present the theological case.
Yeah.
Which I think is a much better way to handle it.
Well, fortunately for me, I came to the ELCA officially in 2010, so the hubbubaloo was fairly past by that time. Basically, the people that wanted to leave were already going out the door.
Yeah.
I had a little trouble in the Midwest, but once I got to California, it was the promised land.
Yeah.
So I never had to fight. Oddly, in seminary, I think I had to fight more for my high Christology than I did for my queerness.
Well, at PLTS, assuredly.
Well, there are a lot of unfair and untrue things that are said about PLTS and have been for 40 years, and it's just not accurate. And it tends to be, by the way, Luther seminary grads that perpetuate all that junk. It's getting better now, from what I understand.
That's good.
But it was, this wasn't some radical off-the-wall place. I mean, maybe if you went down the hill to other seminaries, which I kind of wish I'd done more of, by the way. I'd go hang out more at Pacific School of Religion now if I could do it all over again. I'd take classes there and everything. But at the time, I was young and a new thinker, a new theologian, so I didn't want to... Well, I wasn't really a theologian, a new seminary student, so I didn't want to... I wanted to be Lutheran. So was it the Lutheran time that was taken that really solidified your own shift?
Well, no, that was my shift actually happened before I became a Lutheran. But the time that was taken was one of the things that I appreciated about the Lutherans.
Did that influence your decision to become one?
It did actually influence my decision to become one. But one of the things that really shifted for me was after Kate and I had gotten married, we were trying to deal with finding a new church home and things like that. We were both going to an Episcopalian church for a while. And one of the pastors, he wasn't like the pastor there, but he was a pastor sort of affiliated there. Was just an amazing guy, great pastor, really helped me through some difficult stuff. And then I found out that he was gay. And I was like, okay, well, clearly this person is called to be a pastor. This person is called to be an ordained minister. It's just obvious to anyone who works with him. That he's absolutely 100% called. This is what he should be doing with his life. And so then I had to re-examine my prejudices about that, my presuppositions about that, and that was sort of when the shift really happened for me.
And so you then, in both of the cases you have described, you began with experience, and then your theology was shifted.
Right. Then after that experience, I would go back and I would relook at texts. And at the same point in time, I was beginning to work with Koine Greek in preparation, and then later more seriously in Koine Greek as I worked in preparation towards becoming a pastor later on. And we're looking at the works of Luther as well and things like that. The shift really solidified as I went back to the original Greek.
Because I'm not sure Luther can help you with the LGBT issue.
No, but he can help me with he helped with the communion issue. And on a certain level, he did, looking at Luther and beginning to take, because Luther begins to look at context that texts happen in. Just a little bit. Right? Not like in the whole on like contextual critical method that we use these days.
Right.
But he does occasionally talk about a little bit of context in terms of some of the Old Testament biblical passages and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Or the authorship of letters and what's genuine, what isn't.
Right, exactly. And that really started to get me into that.
So Luther was in some ways responsible for your interest in biblical matters.
Well, Luther, and, I'd had some of these discussions with my parents as well, but as I became a Lutheran and started to read Luther, seeing that these were issues that had been discussed going back, to the 16th century and beyond, was really fascinating to me.
You mean in relating to the communion or related to the sexuality stuff?
All of it.
Yeah.
All of it.
Because I'm really now, I wouldn't have said this a few years ago, but these days I'm really leery of saying Luther can help us particularly on that issue.
Yeah, I don't know if he can help us particularly on that issue, but in terms of issues of the importance of studying the Greek and the importance of studying the original Hebrew.
Well, that's good humanist scholarship.
Right. But in some ways we've lost that.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I agree with that. Particularly in the seminary context. I think I said this on here a couple of weeks ago, but you can go to Yale Divinity School and get a Master of Divinity and not have to take any languages.
Which is terrible.
Yes.
That's just terrible. That's awful.
Well,
you ought to at least have to learn Koine Greek.
How about Hebrew,
bare minimum.
too?
I absolutely think you ought to learn Hebrew. I really think you ought to. But for the modern pastorate, a person wanting to go on in theological studies and things like that really needs to learn Hebrew as well. For the modern pastorate, at the bare minimum, you need to understand Koine Greek, because you need to understand the translation process of the New Testament.
It's so interesting, though, when we say that the bare minimum is Koine Greek, right? Because at PLTS, I never had to learn Hebrew. It was only Koine Greek. But I think the problem when we say that that's the bare minimum is we end up being functional Marcionites at that point.
Explain.
Well, because you're, in a sense, in some ways, chucking out the Old Testament at that point, because you're saying you need to understand the translation process of the New Testament. What about the translation process of the Old Testament?
I think that's important too, but I think you can still get that from Koine Greek, because you can still at least read the Septuagint with Koine Greek.
Yeah, but the Septuagint... Yes, okay, fair, and I see that, but the Reformation emphasis was always on the Hebrew.
Yeah.
And maybe I say this now because I have to take Hebrew. Matter of fact, it begins next semester. That's assuming, of course, Latin doesn't leave me dead. But because I have to take Hebrew. But I think that's one of the things I'm most looking forward to, having transferred to Tübingen, is I'm finally required to learn Hebrew, to the point where, Peter, I can't turn my dissertation in unless I have Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just for doctoral students. The reason that I have the requirement is because the Tübingen doctorate works on the assumption that you have a German theological diploma already.
Yeah. Well, the coursework that I signed on to at Luther when I started included Hebrew.
Oh, because you were on the good curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say that? Yes, I did. Well, I think the way that they changed the curriculum makes sense in some ways, because you want to make sure that the contextual theologies are highlighted.
Right.
But you don't want to give up the kind of language work that you did.
No, and in particular, I of course threw myself especially into language work because I love that. I love that kind of stuff, and would get into the Hebrew and things like that.
Oh yes, we've covered that on here, Mister. I spoke Latin when I was 12. Hey,
Yep.
look, my German friends who had 6 years of Latin in the equivalent of high school never spoke it.
That's fascinating.
Never spoke it.
Fascinating to me.
You had a hell of a teacher.
I did have a hell of a teacher.
I hope you thanked her.
Oh, absolutely, I did.
But the experience shaping and shifting your theology, this becomes a bit of a difficult tightrope to walk if you're going to have both the experience shaping your theology and the kind of theological depth that we're talking about in the moment, where you have all these languages and then presumably you have some historical theology and you then have contemporary questions. It becomes a lot to hold together.
It does, and one of the things I always stress is that my experience never defines my theology. My experience would force me to reconsider my theology, to go back and re-examine it and say, is this true?
That's interesting, because I would actually say, in all honesty, that my experience does define my theology. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be a systematic theologian if it wasn't for specific experiences that drove me to ask these kinds of questions.
Right, but I still think it's important that we get our answers to those questions from a biblical foundation.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I think experience drives the questions we ask.
Uh-huh.
But I think that our answers have to come from a strong biblical foundation.
Doesn't experience, though, also shape how we see and hear the Bible?
It does to a certain extent. I mean, there's no escaping that. But again, I've said this before, I deeply believe that I can justify all of my theological opinions, all of my theological beliefs, through a contextual, literal translation of the Bible.
And by contextual, you mean what it meant in the first century, for instance.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, like the prohibitions against homosexuality and things like that have to do with how that was defined in the first century, which leans more towards pederasty than the modern understanding of two consenting adults. Which I think we can all still agree that non-consensual intergenerational relationships are bad.
Yes, that would not be a hard one to.
Right.
My experience confirms that. No, I'm kidding. But, no, I see what you mean. I guess I'm not these days. How do I say this? I agree with Dolores Williams and my mentor, Linda Thomas, that all theology is contextual. And I mean contextual in the sense that experience is really the tail that wags the dog. And even in Nicaea, even the objective creeds, this is by the way, riffing on what I learned from Dolores Williams and Linda Thomas, but even the Nicene Creed is shaped by a particular cultural experience and a particular cultural standpoint. So I don't think the Nicene Creed is objective truth. It's beautiful, transcendent, ecstatic poetry to testify to the triune God. But that doesn't mean it can't be amended and played with a little bit today.
A little bit. I don't know.
Silence.
I don't know how far I'm willing to go with that.
Now
you've hit my theological rigidity.
Uh-huh. I'm just playing right around in there, aren't I?
Yeah, well, fortunately for me, we've run out of time.
Oh, okay. Well, part 2 of Peter's theological rigidity then comes next week.
Right, and hopefully starting next week, we might even be able to get back to hour-long episodes.
Oh, wouldn't that be lovely? I've missed our hour-long episodes.
I am done with my partial hospitalization program this week.
Fantastic. And you've kicked Satan in the teeth, I hope.
Yes, I have.
Excellent. Well, on that note, I'm Brock Jennings.
And I'm Peter Clark.
And this is your friendly, neighborhood, contextualized theological podcast, Stumbling Block.
Stumbling Block is a production of Silver Turkey Studios. Our Patreon producer is Ben Dittman, our executive producer is Peter Clark, and our executive director is Brock Jennings. Our theme music is by Mirrors for Windows, and we are hosted by Podbean. We can be reached by email at stumblingblockpodcast@gmail.com. Please consider supporting us at patreon.com/stumblingblock. And as always, thank you for listening.